Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land. I'm on the land of the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, and I would like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Today is National Sorry Day, a day to say sorry, to remember and acknowledge the oppression of First Nations peoples through the stolen generations. And it's also a day to commit to a journey of healing. Good morning, and thank you for joining this Human Rights in Action webinar about diverting all young children from jails, watch houses and courts. My name is Andrew Foley, and I'm the Queensland Raise the Age campaign coordinator with QCOS. Today, we're honoured to be joined by key leaders, advocates and practitioners. Today, we are joined by Catherine Hayes, CEO of Youth Advocacy Centre, who will share about this topic from her extensive legal and advocacy expertise. We'll hear from Howard Shue, the Policy and Advocacy Lead with 54 Reasons and Save the Children Australia, who will explore this topic from his expertise with a child and human rights lens. Justin Power, the Director of Member Services with Queensland Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Child Protection Peak, will share about critical elements for a comprehensive approach to divert all children younger than 14 away from the legal system. And additionally, Justin will share about the need for First Nations-led and resourced solutions. James Kerr is a leader in the On-Country program and compliance manager with Jabalbina in Cairns. Cairns will share about his inspiring work on the ground, supporting and empowering young people. Earlier this year, the Queensland Government passed the Strengthening Community Safety Bill 2023, which unfortunately included multiple overrides of the Queensland Human Rights Act 2019. Queensland continues to imprison more children than any other state or jurisdiction in Australia. Queensland also has the highest recidivist rate of any jurisdiction. 96% of children entering the Cleveland Detention Centre in Townsville allegedly commit an offence within the year of release. When children are put in jails and watch houses at a young age, it perpetuates harm and can lead to more problematic behaviour. But a better future is possible, where children and families are supported, human rights are upheld, and communities are safer. This Human Rights in Action webinar will explore this topic from a legal perspective and child rights perspective. We will also learn about critical elements of a positive, community-led, culturally safe, non-punitive alternative to the criminal justice system for all children younger than 14. Some housekeeping before we start. We are filming today, so if that's not for you, you may choose to leave. We may have a few questions if there is time, so please use the Q&A section on the screen to send through any questions. I'd like to start by introducing Catherine Hayes, CEO of Youth Advocacy Centre. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you everyone for attending this morning. It's wonderful to see so much engagement on this issue because it's a really important issue. I was also really pleased to see some young people popping up, so it's even more encouraging to see young people engaging in this debate. It's also important that all of us engage because sometimes this debate can get hijacked by people who have an agenda to push that results in our young people going into detention at high rates. So I think we have a bit of a moral obligation to really engage in what's going on with youth justice at the moment. So from a legal perspective, I just wanted to drill down into the recent amendments before I go any further. So a bit of history. In 2014 and 15, the LNP's laws, they were introduced and they were spoken about as being breach of bail laws, but they weren't actually breach of bail laws. What happened when the LNP introduced their laws in 2014 was that if a young person was on bail for committing an offence And if they committed another offence, the actual commission of that offence was an offence. So it's a double punishment. Someone committed an offence while on bail, then they became a double punishment for committing that offence. So it was widely criticised as inflicting double punishment on young people. And we actually didn't see a great deal of take up on those laws. So there are about, I think there are about 180 kids that were charged under those laws over the whole life of them, which was over 2 years. Now, in contrast, the current government has gone to the other extreme. They have implemented these really harsh laws, which mean that if a young person breaches a condition of their bail, then it's a criminal offence. Now, up until this point, magistrates have used bail conditions for young people to introduce fairly therapeutic bail conditions. So this means a bail condition might be you must attend school, you must attend appointments to address substance abuse issues, you must go to some therapies that help you with impulse control, those kind of bail conditions. So if a young person doesn't adhere to those conditions, that behaviour is criminalised. And quite clearly, it's not criminal not to go to school, but these new laws make it a crime. An example of this, the harshness of these laws that we have seen here at the Youth Advocacy Centre is a little boy who is a 13-year-old Aboriginal boy. He lives on the streets. He comes into our office fairly frequently. He is an absolutely adorable boy. He's on bail for armed robbery. He held up a convenience store with a Stanley knife trying to get some food. So he's been on the street for about 6 months or so. So now he's on bail. And one of his bail conditions is that he must go home to where his mother lives with his stepfather, who he says is abusive. So it is now a crime for this young boy to not go home to the abusive home. So that's a really strong example of how these laws are criminalising behaviour that really isn't criminal. And we've seen from Minister Farmer's speech in Parliament, I think 2 days ago, there have been around 300 young people charged for breach of bail since these laws were introduced 2 months ago. So that's 300 charges for behaviour that may not be otherwise criminal that has been criminalised. This also means that magistrates may not be ordering the therapeutic conditions, which is also alarming because these conditions for bail helped rehabilitate the young people rather than criminalise their behaviour. So now we're seeing fewer therapeutic bail conditions and surprisingly an increase in harsh conditions like 24-hour curfews. I was talking to a colleague of mine in Inala, and they have seen a really high number of young people having 24-hour curfews imposed. So that means that they must be at their home for 24 hours or they're allowed to go to their bail support service. And as a result, the bail support service is being inundated and overwhelmed with the young people just wanting a break from their home environment. This service hasn't received an increase in funding, but is really struggling to keep up with the demand because of these new laws. The surprising impact, though, is that we haven't seen an overflow into watch houses and detention centres, which we fully expected to. Maybe this is down the track, but luckily that hasn't resulted, and we're very pleased, but monitoring that closely. Another interesting example that we've also seen is that because there has been an increase in the harshness of the laws resulting in a higher likelihood of detention, defence lawyers are now making applications for electronic monitoring, and where this hasn't happened in the past. A couple of weeks ago, we made an application for a young person to receive electronic monitoring instead of detention, but the police opposed that application, and as a result we were unsuccessful, and the young person was returned to detention and wasn't able to get electronic monitoring because he was in a residential care home. And it was deemed that he was at a high risk of reoffending. So he's gone now into detention where he could have been properly supported in the community. That also leads to another issue which is very complicated, and that's the inadequacy of support for young people who are in residential care. They're often just left without proper support services. And this leads to these circumstances where they don't have adequate support to help them from reoffending. So this is another alarming issue, which is the intersection of young people who have been exposed to the child safety system and now are part of the youth justice system. But that's a whole other topic that's for another day. In terms of children younger than 14, there is about 7% of children younger than 14 on remand generally. So that means that these young people are in detention without having been sentenced. So everybody is probably aware of the very high figure of young people generally on remand while in detention. So it's about at any one time between 80 and 90% of young people in detention have not actually been sentenced yet. This is a lower amount for under 14s, but it's still too high. So 7% of the children in remand are younger than 14. And then when children younger than 14 are sentenced, fewer than 1% actually receive a custodial sentence. So magistrates, magistrates and other judges, when they are reviewing the circumstances of children younger than 14, they don't give them custodial sentences. But in contrast, they're spending a lot of time on remand. The crimes that we see children younger than 14 primarily commit tend to be theft and unlawful entry. There's also, and I think some of my co-presenters will address this, very concerning overrepresentation of disability and trauma, and this is an issue that has been going on for years and still isn't properly addressed. So almost all young people in detention and in the youth justice system have experienced some form of trauma, whether that's domestic and family violence, parents with substance abuse issues, violence from another young person. It's interesting to note that the biggest cohort that are the victims of youth crime are young people themselves, and also intergenerational trauma. This is really significant. In terms of disability, FASD, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, is something that is not being properly addressed in Queensland, and young people in detention are most likely to have an overrepresentation of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder in their cohort. There was a study in Western Australia a couple of years ago that showed that a really high number of young people have FASD.
No, just listening to the same thing, but I can jump at any point.
In Queensland, we have a really dismaying underrepresentation of assessment and ascertainment and treatment of kids with FASD. So it's not being picked up, even though it's a very high chance that a lot of kids have FASD. This is something that needs to be done because they're not being supported, which also means that the root causes of their offending aren't being addressed. And as we all know, there's an alarming overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young kids, especially amongst the under 14 cohort. After 14 years of age, the non-Aboriginal kids tend to catch up, but we really need to address this overrepresentation in the younger years. And then finally, just wanted to note that 40% of young children in the youth justice system have had contact with child safety. And I think that that's really important to look at that intersection. So 40% of young people have been under the guardianship of the state at some point and have ended up in the youth justice system. That's something that we need to do something about. That's it for me, and I'll pass on to the next presenter. But thank you, everybody, for your attention this morning.
Thank you for sharing, Catherine, from your expertise there, and some really heartbreaking statistics there. I would like to now introduce Howard Chu, the Policy and Advocacy Lead with 54 Reasons and Save the Children Australia. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. May I begin by just acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the lands where I'm videoing in from today. And I'd also like to just pay my respects to elders, both past and present, and to respectfully acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on this webinar today. So as Andrew said, I'm the National Policy and Advocacy Lead for 54 Reasons and Save the Children. Just for context, for those who might not know, we're unashamedly a child rights organisation. We pursue that through advocating for policy reform and system change, and also through service delivery. And that includes delivering youth justice services in Queensland and nationally. And today I'm just going to briefly give a perspective on the recent bill and the operation of the youth justice system in Queensland more broadly, from a child rights and a human rights perspective. And I'm going to draw on a report that we've recently released, which is called Putting Children First, a rights respecting approach to youth justice in Australia. So if we're talking about child rights and human rights and youth justice, I guess the first question is, so what are child rights? Why do they matter? And I'll say this as simply as I can. Child rights are the things that all children should have so they can develop and thrive to their fullest. And those are rights that come from international human rights standards. They come from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and other sources. And they're rights that are held by all children and young people aged up to 18. And really, when you boil it down, children's rights are about taking children seriously in their own right. So they're about focusing on children and young people's development and about centering them in policy making and government action that affects them. And child rights matter because they provide a really clear framework that can guide government action in all domains that affect children and a roadmap towards a better and a more effective system. And of course, all of this is just sadly very much relevant to youth justice. Sadly, it won't come as any surprise that Queensland's youth justice laws don't stack up at all well against a child rights-based approach. And if you were to compare the recent bill, but also the system more broadly against child rights principles, there are just so many significant and long-standing breaches of rights, which are systemic, but which are felt day to day. And if I could just really quickly name a few of those breaches, which will be, I think, familiar to all of you. But conditions in detention, and that's both sentenced and otherwise, watch houses. There are really clear breaches of child rights standards there, the standards which state that children should never be held with adults and that forced restraint and solitary confinement should be avoided. And of course, we know these are daily occurrences and practices. Bail laws and practices, again, this is, Catherine's spoken to this really powerfully, but it's a fundamental child rights principle that detention should only be a true last resort and for the shortest time possible, and that very much includes pre-trial. And that's based in the inherent harm that can be caused to children and young people when they spend any time in detention. And there's no doubt that the legislative changes earlier this year have worsened that. Again, really speaking the obvious, but it's important to say it, the youth justice system in Queensland is discriminatory in effect, and there could just be no clearer evidence of this than the overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and young people in the system. So really clear violations of rights there, of human rights. And of course, on the theme of this webinar, all of this is just trapping children as young as 10. We know this, so it's trapping them in this cycle of disadvantage and trauma that universally characterises their lives, despite child rights standards and the medical evidence and so much other evidence being clear that the minimum age of criminal responsibility should be at least 14. And so it's so urgent and necessary that we raise the age to 14, and that's for all offences with no exceptions. And also that we put in place the service systems and the programs that are a better alternative to criminalisation. And I think we'll hear more about some of those later today. So we're speaking about human rights. Queensland does have a Human Rights Act that was enacted in 2019. And that act has got specific rights that children have in the criminal justice system, and that recognises their particular vulnerability and the need for children to be treated differently from adults. But also the general rights in the Act also apply to children. And I guess it's just important to point out that the Human Rights Act itself is really far from comprehensive in how it protects children's rights. So it actually only contains a subset of children's rights. And that makes it even more egregious that earlier this year, as we all know, the Queensland government was actually required to specifically override its own Human Rights Act in order to enact that so-called Strengthening Community Safety Bill, which became an act. And so in other words, that was the government formally acknowledging that its youth justice measures could not actually be legislated without effectively suspending the operation of human rights. And so that was specifically in relation to three things in the context of the bill as a whole. So criminalising breach of bail for children, that was one that required overriding of the Act. There was also creating a much harsher sentencing regime for child offenders who'd been declared so-called serious repeat offenders. And the third was the requirement that courts actually order children to serve suspended periods of detention for the breach of certain conditional release orders. So in other words, that removes the court's ability to instead give the child a further opportunity to comply with that order based on their circumstances. So those are the three provisions where there was a formal override of human rights. And so what can we take from all of this from the Human Rights Act overriding? I'd suggest there are two key points for us to focus on. I think one is just that it's extraordinary that the Queensland government is directly overriding human rights laws. Yeah, and it's worth mentioning that the Human Rights Act itself acknowledges that rights are not absolute. The Act acknowledges that it's permissible to limit rights where that's necessary, where it's justifiable and proportionate. But that's not what's happened here. Instead, what's happened here is the government has acknowledged that these provisions are actually incompatible with children's rights. So I think that's a really clear sign that a line's been crossed with these measures. And the second point that I'd like to make is that in defending its decision to override the Human Rights Act, and it did this in Parliament in a formal statement, the government relied on what it called, and I'm quoting, an exceptional crisis situation constituting a threat to public safety. So I'd say if that's the justification that's being relied upon for these extraordinary regressive acts, then I think it really behooves all of us to think about how we can challenge that claim that we have some kind of public safety crisis associated with children and young people. Just so I mentioned up top our recent report on what a rights respecting approach to youth justice could look like in Australia. What that report does is it looks at youth justice systems across Australia to develop a bit of a national picture, because a lot of these concerns that we've spoken about in Queensland are similar across jurisdictions. But I thought just to put Queensland youth justice in the context of trends and developments nationally, what I do is just show a snapshot comparison of Australian youth justice systems and how they line up against child rights requirements. So hopefully what you can now see is a snapshot. So it compares each state and territory against different aspects of the youth justice system, where red is the most egregious breaches against child rights standards. And, I think that paints a picture as to where Queensland stands, a sad picture. So in a context where across the board in Australia, there's lots of room for improvement in youth justice compared to very clear child rights and human rights standards, Queensland nonetheless stands out as particularly problematic. And I think that'll be recognisable to you. And I'd actually go one step further and suggest that this doubling down on the breaching of rights as the approach to youth justice in Queensland, if anything, that's fueling this really, frankly, toxic public conversation around youth justice that continues to dominate, a lot of the conversation in Queensland. So I think it's a pretty clear sign of the need for a genuine paradigm shift in how we approach and understand youth justice and youth matters. So just in closing, what I'd like to highlight is that a child rights approach or a rights respecting approach actually provides the basis for a fundamental shift in approach across the system from what we've got now. So that's a shift away from a punitive and an incarceration-based short-term approach to one that's actually based on upholding rights. It's based on providing effective support to children and young people and addressing root causes of the challenges in their lives, in the communities, and in their behaviour. And in the end, it's about a shift to a system that's more effective, as I think Andrew and Catherine have both spoken to. It's more effective in achieving the goals of youth justice. Because ultimately, if we respect children's rights, we're going to make the community more safe, because we'll be reducing offending, reducing recidivism, and actually diverting children and young people away from the justice system. So the last thing I'd just like to end on is just to put to you all that I'd propose that a child rights approach should be our North Star for reform, as we all work to shift these systems to something a lot better than what we've got now, because it is possible. So thank you for your time. I'll pass back to Andrew.
Thank you so much, Howard. Really powerful insights. Thank you very much. Our next two presenters will actually be focusing on, we've heard the challenges. Our next two presenters will be talking about the solutions. What does that look like? And as I shared before, a better future is possible where children and families are supported, human rights are upheld, and communities are safer. Our next presenter is Justin Power, Director at Queensland Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Child Protection Peak. Thank you very much, Justin.
Can I just confirm you can see the PowerPoint there, Andrew? Or...
Perfect. That's great.
Perfect. Cool. Let me just... Just bear with me for a second. I apologize.
No worries at all. Take your time.
Okay. Right, yeah, and you can see that changing there. I can just confirm. Yeah, Watamuli Wadajatalagari, Yanagini Justin Power. So hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Justin Power, and as Andrew's mentioned, I'm Director of Member Services here at QuadSip. But just quickly, by way of my own cultural introduction here, I'm a proud descendant of the Birragubba people. On my mother's side, I hail from the Juru people of Bowen in North Queensland. I also hail from Jangga and Biri people, from small communities in the Whitsundays. I'm also a descendant of Ulgart, Stephen Island in the Torres Strait. On my dad's side, I'm a Durrumble's descendant of Rockhampton and have ties to Espiritu Santo Island as part of the South Sea Island community. I'm joining you today from the beautiful lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples here in Meanjin. I'd just like to acknowledge those ancestors that have passed for their knowledge and wisdom that they have, that still exists in the earth today, and recognise the elders present who are carrying on that knowledge and wisdom and handing down that knowledge to our next generation. There as well. I'd also like to acknowledge, the day as being National Sorry Day and what that means to our people, not only in terms of reflection of the past, but also about how our hope is for the future, in healing and learning from those past, those stories, listening, respecting and sharing with one another, so that we can create a better future for our families. For those that don't know, about QuadSip. QuadSip's the peak body representing the Queensland Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander community control sector in a range of services that work holistically in family wellbeing, in child safety or in youth justice. We also have some work or services that we support that are delivering domestic and family violence services within community. I don't want to talk too much about kind of QuadSip, but one of the, I guess, to share with people in terms of our mandate is that we want to build positive futures for our children. Our vision is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people are physically, emotionally, spiritually strong, live in safe and caring and nurturing environments within their own families and their own communities, that they're afforded the same life opportunities available to other children and young people to achieve their full potential. We recognise that, and we've heard today even that government systems aren't working, and we know and we recognise that the solutions sit within our communities, and so the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of Queensland are the ones that can nurture kids, that can replenish communities, that can really grow up. And I want to talk a bit about help kids grow up in and have positive futures and achieve their full potential. And so I want to sit this conversation with. I agree with Howard in that Catherine really highlighted some of the fundamentals, and I wanted to present this slide to you. Fundamentals in that what we're dealing with, what we're seeing in young people today is not something that just happened. There are deep-seated issues that have brought our young people before the criminal justice system. We are working to intervene and divert Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people away from a life of crime, but we must recognise that solutions to do that have to address those deep-seated issues of intergenerational trauma, and we've heard about that. So what are community-led solutions? It is solutions that are created, designed, developed, delivered, implemented and evaluated for mob, by mob, and are led out by mob. And like I said, that so whatever the solution is must align to what those needs are, and whatever those to address those underlying or causational factors that we see in young people today. What we know is that across Australia, when Aboriginal, or what we know in terms of evidence and overseas and here in Australia, is that when Aboriginal community organisations receive the support they need and deserve, they have strong purpose and a governance structure, they successfully address the effects of colonisation, dispossession, intergenerational trauma, which are, like I said, still existing in our mobs today. Support for self-determination is the starting point. Many other countries across the world, and even have found creative solutions to foster what self-determination looks like and means. In Australia, the policy pendulum seems to shift a bit differently. It has a bit of a top-down approach that creates disempowers to our community. And what we know from our community organisations and community is that it's a bottom-up approach that is required and that is needed. Community-based services are well placed to respond to the complex needs of First Nations people. They have a reach internally. Their community organisations are set up with health arms, with family wellbeing, with youth mentoring, with early childhood programs and services. So the holistic approach sits there nicely within those organisations. Not only do Aboriginal-led services foster self-determination and thus having a sense of control and confidence supporting this model, it also means that services are holistic, culturally safe, and it can be trusted. When we think about community-led solutions and preferencing community responses, it enables us to work towards a future of underpinned by self-determination. Community-controlled and effective service delivery to First Nations people. Not only will this give First Peoples a sense of empowerment control, it indeed upholds sovereignty. It will help to address the systemic disadvantage that sadly exists in our communities today. So when we talk about community-led solutions, that's what it looks like. But this is some of the critical elements that I want to share with you. So what are they? What we know is that over the years, we've had reports, Royal Commission, productivity commissions, closing the gap, and a range of other evidence and reviews that have spoken to these particular elements. And hopefully you can see them in there, see them on the screen. Self-determination is at the heart of it, the heart of our responses, enabling Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to share in decision-making on things that affect them, addressing laws and policies and practices that operate in the detriment or to the detriment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Ongoing investment, and we talked about, I think Catherine had raised that in terms of investment needs to be long-term, not short stints here and there, but long-term investment in programs and in capacity building of organisations and individuals. A genuine sense of collaboration across government with non-government organisations and the sector to address overrepresentation. Ensuring access to effectively culturally safe services at the right time. One of the things we know in our sector is that services don't operate Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. They operate when the need of community exists. And so it can sit a lot of the time outside those business hours, if you like. Addressing racism and discrimination is critical and fundamental to a solution that diverts young people. We're talking not just about we need to get to the root causes, and that's what I heard loud and clear, and that's exactly what a community-led response needs to look at. Getting to the root cause of what brings people before, or what brings our young ones before the criminal justice system. One of the other things that QATSIP have done here, we've conducted our own evidence review and position paper, which recognises what I've just shared there now, but also some other important elements, and that is some alternatives to how investment can be structured. So investments approaches like the justice reinvestment that we hear and know, having a model like that or using that as the template to build ways of reinvesting into community-led solutions. Culture as a protective factor. The lack of appropriate programs for First Nation people is something that we also identified in our review. And when we talk about appropriate, we mean sufficient and intensely support children coming in contact with the justice system at such a young age, and that support needs to be First Nations designed, led, and delivered. We also recognise that the entry point for young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and the exit points are different. So programs need to be aligned and suit the needs of our Aboriginal women as well that come in contact with the system. And some of the work that we so when we talk about all of this, a lot of the program that we support the services to deliver now, it's not across across a number. The family-led youth justice, family-led decision making, the My Family, Our Decisions, Our Way program, is only delivered in certain locations. But what we've seen in this is when I've talked about all of those critical elements to what a community-led solution looks like, they are exhibited in this particular program. The program operates by helping young people and families in crisis. And we know that from our experience that there are many things. There's not one thing that an organisation is dealing with. There can be multiple things. There's a lot going on for families. And the My Family, Our Decision, Our Way is a process where authority is given to the young person and their families to work together to solve challenges and worries and concerns that they have. That they get to lead the discussion. They get to lead the development of what a plan would look like, suited to their goals, to their aspirations, to their hopes and dreams. And it enables self-agency. It enables the ability to lead the decisions, create solutions that make sense for them. It produces change and better lives lived for our mob. I've got a bit of a case study, and I don't know if I'm okay for time, Andrew. Is that okay? Cool. And so I've talked a lot there, but I think it's best to hear about a particular case. And so I want to share this case study with you. I want to preface this by saying that the content and information is fact and real, but the names in the video are aliases. But let's hear about what self-determination looks like, the ability to lead decision making from a particular case study here.
John is a 15-year-old First Nations young man. When the My Family, Our Decisions, Our Way staff member, Jacinta, met John, he'd been remanded in custody for over a year. John's family have experienced the impact of intergenerational incarceration and trauma, with 2 of John's younger siblings both heavily involved in the youth justice system and 2 in out-of-home care. Despite he and his family going through a lot of distress and separation, John expressed a high level of kindness and care for his sisters, saying that one of the most concerning things he found about being in detention was that he was not home to protect and support them. It was clear from the beginning that John was untrusting of support services, as he'd been let down in the past. Jacinta focused on building trust with John in small steps, with regular visits, relationship building, and practical assistance, and most importantly, being consistent and reliable. Jacinta stated, "I was consistent and honest and made sure I saw him regularly. I didn't want to be another person who let him down." After these initial trust-building and engagement activities, Jacinta and John documented his family tree. John identified he'd had good connections with his sisters and mum, but that he wanted more positive male role models in his life. John felt like a lot of his charges were down to being in the wrong place at the wrong time and getting involved with the wrong people. He was consistently going along with criminal activity instigated by a group of influential young males. This was often a result of him wanting to feel accepted and loved by this group. However, he identified that he got caught up in some pretty awful situations by going along with them. Alongside her work with John, Jacinta also overcame a range of challenges to engage with John's family. While she was not able to gain consent from John's sisters to work with them because of their transience, she was able to overcome a deep mistrust of services from John's mother, Hannah, through a partnership with other stakeholders who were already engaged with her. Hannah talked about what was going on for John and the family. Through the My Family, Our Decisions, Our Way process, Hannah was supported to talk about what she wanted for John and the family. Hannah's biggest wish was to have all of her family together again, and she was really keen to come up with solutions to get John out of detention and back home. John wanted this too. To achieve this goal, Jacinta then worked with the family on a plan. Hannah wanted specific actions in the plan about John being supported to apply for Centrelink so he could build his financial independence. So this too was included in the plan. Jacinta, John and Hannah continued to work on the plan whilst John was in detention, with a focus on building John's community network and linking him with employment opportunities. Throughout the process, the youth justice staff working with John took their lead from Jacinta and valued Hannah and John's voice in the process. following through with concrete actions and support to make sure the family plan could be implemented. Through further work on the family plan, Jacinta was able to secure employment opportunities available for John when he was released. It was this, as well as other supports detailed in the plan, which resulted in him being granted bail and released from detention. When John was released from detention, his family plan helped to guide Jacinta, John and Hannah in what they needed to focus on to achieve their goals. John was able to start employment through the opportunity Jacinta had lined up with him. Jacinta also supported John to have health assessment at the local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Medical Service. This identified John had a speech delay, so he was referred to a speech pathologist for assistance. After securing employment for John and successfully completing the goal of returning John home to be with his family, Jacinta closed the case with John and referred him to other stakeholders to continue working on different parts of the family plan. Jacinta stayed in touch with John to see how he was going. Sadly, a number of months later, John was caught up with the offending cycle again. He had disengaged from work to spend time with his sisters, and when 3 of his friends got released from detention, John offended again. Jacinta has not lost hope. She believes as long as the family and young person trust her as a supportive person, there's still a chance to get him back on track. Jacinta says, "Even though there are a lot of challenges in this family, I see a lot of positives. They love each other so much and they want to be home together. They have each other's backs and they really do care for each other." Having positive interactions was the change for John, forming a pathway for John to know he can achieve positive outcomes into the future. He also learnt from this experience that he can ask for help, make plans, and that services can support him to achieve them. This is an important foundational change from his experiences. Given the high level of trauma that John and his family are coping with and seeking to heal from, their collective progress with the My Family, Our Decisions, Our Way program is very significant and creates a path for future healing and positive change. John.
So that pretty much concludes, but if I could just kind of sum up or round off our conversation today, that diversion programs or diverting young people requires an holistic approach. It requires, from a community controlled or a community point of view, that it's critical self-determination, shared decision making, holistic responses are necessary if we want to really drive down overrepresentation and improve the lives of our young people, our families, and our communities. It's long-term investment is a critical factor in how we build our sector, how we build responses, and that they are culturally safe, a trauma-informed and healing-informed framework is what will also achieve greater outcomes for our mob. And that's what we know in terms of all of the research, all of the evidence that exists out there. So I just want to appreciate everybody joining me and joining this conversation and obviously listening to me today. And I appreciate Andrew for the opportunity to share some of what's happening and some of those solution and ideas that's working in the work that we're doing here at QATSIP. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin. I know I'm inspired of a more hopeful future, as we said, where kids are supported in their culture and in their community and rights are upheld and everyone is safer because of it. So yeah, thank you so much, Justin. Now I'd like to introduce James Kerr, the compliance manager with Jabalbina and a leader on country in Cairns, a local legend on the ground working with young people. And I can see Alex is there as well. So thanks so much, James.
Thanks, Andrew. Yalada. So my name is James Kerr. I'm the General Manager for Jabalbina Yallinji Aboriginal Corporation. We are a community-led organisation in the Cairns and Mosman region. I'm a strong Gujala Yuba man of the Basalt Country and its lagoons, west to the magnificent White Mountains in the National Park in northwest Queensland, Charters Towers. Today I'd like to acknowledge traditional owners on whose land we meet today and pay respect to past, present and future. We have survived 60,000 years plus. That is a really amazing achievement for our people. I'd like to introduce you to Alex.
Yunda Yalada, Naya Buri, Alex Friday. That's in Yalanji language. Hello everyone, my name is Alex Friday. I'm the manager of the on-country program here in Cairns. I am a proud Cookie Yalanji man from the Daintree region on my father's side, and also an Ulkala man from Laura, the desert people in Cape York. On my mother's side, I am a Waka Waka Gubby Gubby man from down south. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of where we meet today. James and I are here in Gimmoy, in Cairns, the land of the Wallabara Yidinji people.
We would also like to acknowledge today as National Sorrow Day to remember and commemorate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who were forcibly removed from their families under the government policies, who have become known as the Stolen Generation. Tomorrow is also the start of Reconciliation Week, where all Australians walk together with a shared history, culture and achievements, be a voice for generations. We would just like to thank Andrew and the QCOS team for their amazing work to eliminate equality and disadvantages in our society. I'd also like to acknowledge those who are here today to make a genuine difference in the lives of our young people, because they are our future. So the Jabberbenal on Country program aims to reconnect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander youth offenders with their culture in a bid to stop the revolving door of children in detention. The program will engage with elders and traditional owners and will target repeat young offenders, giving them support to turn their lives around and get back into education, job or pro-social activities, while participating in an on-country culture healing camp to reconnect them back to Bubu and Wawu. So beyond incarceration, for this journey, I'll use the name Taika as a young person. We would like to take you on a short journey and tell you a story of a young man named Taika. He's age 17. Taika has grown up in an environment where offending is considered the norm. In his neighbourhood, criminal behaviour is something to aspire to. Within his family, there is a culture of worklessness and a lack of positive role models. He had an extensive offending history, which began when he was 13 or earlier. Much of his offending had been related to gang-affiliated activities, mainly vehicle crime, robberies and assaults, and had been in custody several times. Taika first found out about the existence of the on-country program through Youth Justice caseworkers. He then asked his caseworkers to refer him to our program. At this point, Taika was around 13, 14 years of age and was registered with the police as a priority prolific offender. Although he was anxious not to admit it initially, he had been involved with a gang fraternity or a brotherhood where he lived. Every time that Taika came out of custody, he found himself surrounded by the same people and same culture of criminality. By the time he came to our program, Taika was keen to make a change and turn his life around. The most important thing for him upon release from custody was to find work and somewhere to live. Although reluctant to leave the area that he had grown up in and where his family resided, the final straw came when he was involved in a car accident as a passenger of a vehicle and was badly injured. Taika knew how to change his life around.
So Taika knew he had to change his life around and stop the cycle of his reoffending behaviours by participating in the on-country program. But because of his PPA status, Taika found it extremely difficult to do anything within the community without being noticed by the QPS. A cultural mentor had been assigned to Taika to provide real, meaningful and intensive support to build relationships with stakeholders to try and divert him away from the youth justice system. Taika is now a law-abiding citizen and has changed his life around. Taika's housing situation is safe and stable. Taika has positive influences within his life, including his family. Taika is engaged in pro-social activities. Taika has been attending our on-country cultural healing camps to awaken his inner wawu, which is spirit, and reconnect him back to bubu, which is country. Taika has a better routine and has improved his pro-social skills. Taika has decreased his AOD usage immensely and is exploring different ways to cope with any cravings through these pro-social activities. Taika has obtained a proof of age card, a tax file number, a driver's license and other documents. We're also very proud to acknowledge Tiger has gained employment working with us here at Jabbabina as a trainee mentee on the On Country program, mentoring other at-risk young people who are caught up in the system, and he is also enrolled in the Cert 3 in community service. Through his story, we are able to share that you can achieve anything that you set your mind to. Tiger knew it would take a lot of hard work, determination, and grit, and perseverance, but it's worth it, he says. It's worth it, he says. Be kind, work hard, and stay humble. Yalada, thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. I know I've got tears in my eyes hearing that story of the impact in his life of the On Country program and of people that are supporting him in culture and in community. So thank you so much, Alexander, and thank you, James, for sharing that powerful story to show that a better future is possible. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we do have a little moment maybe for a couple of questions. If people would like to put those in the Q&A, we have some, a moment for questions for some of our presenters. So if you would like to do that, that would be great. Yeah, lots of love coming through around your presentation, James and Alexander. Thank you. One of the questions that did come through in advance, and I'll put it to the presenters, was a question around the Queensland government not responding to evidence-based solutions for diverting children away from the legal system, the criminal justice system. I wonder if which presenter would like to speak to that very briefly. Catherine.
I can, yes. Andrew. Sorry, would you mind just repeating the question?
The question was from one of the attendees was why the Queensland government at the moment doesn't appear to be following evidence-based solutions in this space.
Okay, yeah. Political reasons would be the answer. So they're responding to the community feeling, which is almost hysterical, and just a real negative feeling against young people offending. It's funny when you read the media commentary and then even just talk to people in the community who are well educated and well informed, they still think kids should be locked up. It surprises me all the time. It's just it just feels like we're pushing against the tide on this, and people aren't interested generally in evidence-based solutions, and as a result the government isn't taking a strong position publicly. Having said that, though, there is strong government support for intervention and diversionary programs, but more in the background and more quietly. And I met with Minister Farmer, the new Youth Justice Minister, yesterday, and she and her experienced Director General Bob G affirmed their commitment to intervention and diversion. So I really hope that that translates to a coordinated approach, because what we need is coherent and consistent approach across all the departments: youth justice, child safety, education and health, so that all of these kids are caught as soon as possible and have a structure of support around them.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. At this point, I'd like to just share some actions flowing out of this webinar from today. We will be sending an email around to attendees, and we will include some other key documents flowing out of that. We'll include the 54 Reasons report. We'll include some information from QATSIP, including the position paper and some other information there. So I encourage you to read further about this. Also, I can note that, Aisha from Justice Reform Initiative is in this meeting as well. I know Justice Reform Initiative are releasing a report that intersects with this important topic next week. So I encourage you to take a look at that and read that around solutions. Also, just to be aware, and I'll put it in the chat right now, QCOS has released a pre-budget submission calling for the government to invest in Queensland's youth services to divert all children younger than 14 away from the criminal justice system. And as has been shared before, we want that to be, to have First Nations leadership involved in the design and the delivery of that. And communities to be leading this work. We want that to be trauma-informed and community organisations and community-controlled organisations funded for this vital work to divert children away from the justice system. So I'll put a link to that in the, so I encourage you to take a look at that as well. And we will also send that out as well. If you are interested in joining the Queensland Raise the Age campaign, which is about raising the age of criminal responsibility, but also about calling for the government to fund comprehensively fund a comprehensive approach to divert children away from the justice system, please get in touch. I'm putting my email in now. And so please get in touch with me and I would love to hear from you. Part of that is we would love to hear from local services on the ground, local legends who are doing beautiful work to showcase those positive stories of programs and community initiatives that are doing beautiful work at a grassroots level. Michael will put up a poll in a moment. We're really keen to continue to improve our webinars. So we would love to get your feedback about the webinar so we can continue to deliver, quality content and quality presenters for you. So thank you for that. If you would like to fill that in, that would be powerful. Thank you for that. Thank you so much for being a part of the presentation today. Our presenters, I think you will agree that the insight and expertise and knowledge that they brought painted a picture of where we're at, but also painted a picture for a more hopeful future for children, families and communities in Queensland. Thank you very much to our presenters and thank you everyone for attending today. And we look forward to, I encourage you to look at QCOS events for upcoming webinars around the Human Rights in Action series as well. So thank you very much for being a part today. And a big thank you to our presenters. Thank you.